Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. We continue with the breaking news from Mozambique on the confirmation of Frelimo's Daniel Chapo as the winner of the presidential election. We're now joined by Professor Adriano Novungu. He's the director at the Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Mozambique. He joins us from Maputo. Good afternoon, Professor. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Firstly, your reaction to the council's announcement confirming Daniel Chapo the winner of the October 9 election.
So thank you very much for having me. My reaction is of disbelief. Disbelief because for what we have seen since the 9th of October until today, in terms of the electoral procedures, although the CNE, which is the National Electoral Commission, has declared Chapo as the winner. But when asked by national and international observers about the evidence of that victory, that was not there to be provided. So it is surprising also to see that the Constitutional Council has reduced a bit from 70% to 65%, but without justification, without substantiating that change of results. In reality, the Constitutional Council, as the ultimate organ, is not to change results, is either to validate or return the dossier for that to be changed. So you see more and more that the Constitutional Council is part of the daily procedures of electoral tabulation, which is not its mandate. So I'm in disbelief to see. In disbelief also because it is obvious that this election was not credible, and not being credible, people have been hoping that the Constitutional Council would bring all parties together to find a platform that enabled Mozambique to return to peace and stability, which it could mean learning from South Africa, for instance, that the ANC is working with other political parties as form of a national unity government, which is working perfectly well for South Africans. So that was the hope. But unfortunately, Mozambique has always been governed by Frelimo in an exclusionary, sum zero game type of politics.
I want to take you back to your statement around the revision downwards of the number of votes that were garnered by Daniel Chapo. You say that given that they've decided to revise his votes downwards, then probably what should have happened today, or the announcement should have been perhaps to go and have another revote at this point, where they go back to the polls?
The Constitutional Council, as per mandate, it checks whether the results are valid or not, whether there's been fraud or not. The president today, she said a very concerning statement. She said the following, that elections will only be nullified if materially the fraud is enough to change the results. It should never be like that. Election, is it valid or is it fraudulent? So the election was fraudulent. You cannot estimate to say it was 2%, 3%, 5% fraudulent. It is fraud, it's fraud. Vote, it's one man, one vote. It's a universal right of the women and the men of our country, whose vote is to be thrown away as part of that.
But Professor, there are those who say that there would be a percentage of discrepancies that would be negligible and would allow for perhaps whatever the outcome is to stand in most instances. And I don't necessarily mean with fraud, but just discrepancies in general, that there would be a percentage which then in that instance would be viewed as negligible and allow, as I stated, for those, whatever the outcome was, to stand.
Of course, but when you change 6% from the original results sent by the National Electoral Commission, you changed 6% from the winning candidate down. And you cannot generate a convincing evidence of how you arrived at that percentage. This is number one. Second, before that, international observers, they called for the national electoral institutions to generate the tally sheets per polling station. Make that information available for anyone willing also to do their own calculations. And you said that information is not available, which is the basis for whatever subsequent processes. So where do you get that from? All the changes we're making are based on what?
So what does this mean for the stability of the country now? Because you're there, how is the situation post that announcement?
As I'm seated here, now I can hear that tires are burning. People now, there have been people injured now. And my own team at CDD that is out live streaming, they are being told to go back by the protests because they were threatening to burn our own car. So as you can see, this is going to be a night that can be a bloodshed night. Because as we have seen in the past, people were in the streets in big numbers. They were confronting the police, and the police were shooting to kill. So even considering that Mozambique's election, they have since been leading to post-election violence. But this violence this time, it's unprecedented. It's unprecedented also because it is centered in the urban areas, mainly Maputo, which we never, it's first time to see Maputo rebelling the way it's doing. So,
and has impacted the economy significantly. And I mean, I just saw reports indicating that the GDP growth for the country will be revised downwards. So a continuation would further harm the economy. So what can government do in this point to arrest this problem?
The mission is Herculean. Frelimo has done all this because they control the institutions of governance, of democracy, so they are keeping the status quo using fraud. But when it comes to governance, Mozambique is already at its biggest socioeconomic crisis ever. Remember, Mozambique was projected to be by now a lower middle income country.
Yeah.
But in 10 years, it went down to become the 5th most impoverished country in the world. That means millions of people pushed to poverty, including the then emerging middle class that was swept away by this crisis. And the fiscal distress in Mozambique is such that there won't be magics. Mozambique is in a crisis. In a context like this, you expected the institutions to come together to mobilize people to the center through a national unit government, because the challenge ahead to rescue the country from its biggest crisis ever, it's an Herculean mission. And Frelimo, Chapo, they don't have the instruments to put the country back.
And Professor, the fiscal distress not only affects just Mozambicans, but also the SADC region, because that's why we have the situation of migration across the board.
Indeed, but Mozambique is different. Mozambique is fragile. Mozambique's economy is fragile. The state in Mozambique is fragile. Though the region is also grappling with the same situation, but in Mozambique, it cannot pay salaries to civil servants, cannot pay salaries to the police, cannot pay salaries to the army, cannot pay salaries to the teachers. So when you cannot pay salaries for the foundations of the state, then you have no margin of easily rescuing the country from that crisis. The region is different. And with the crisis that we see now, resulting of the post-election violence. This will push the country back to the levels of Haiti. So Mozambique is risking to be the Haiti of SADC region.
Professor, what a worrying picture you paint there. Hopefully the SADC region itself will stand up and try and assist to ensure at the very least that there's no bloodshed post this announcement. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That's Professor Adriano Novunga. He's the director at the Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Mozambique.